Hey guys, Black Bard here, bringing you guys another comparison video for some ARPGs that I enjoy playing and have looked at over the course of the past 15 years, between Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Path of Exile, Grim Dawn, and two of the new guys, Lords of Mayhem and Last Epoch. In this one, we're going to go over some of the kind of frilly stuff around the edges and then late game, which are extremely important, but we'll kind of tackle some of the odds and ends so that we can get a real comparison between these games. With the little side note saying that Lords of Mayhem and Last Epoch are still in early access and don't necessarily have any evidence of all of the stuff that I'm saying. Some of this is just based on what I've picked up from the developers or talk or some of my ideas that hopefully could make it to some of these games. Anyway, let's move on. All right, now we're going to get into some topics that for me are very personal and really come down and make or break a game. Some of this, we're going to start off with crafting and the kind of customization feel of gear. We'll start off with Diablo 2. Zero crafting. Rune words don't count as crafting. Okay, it was a good start, but there's really no crafting. Diablo 3, there may as well have been no crafting because it was absolutely freaking worthless. None of the gear that you crafted, aside from the very first time you leveled, was used at any other point in the game whatsoever, aside from Hellfire amulets, which you can't consider that crafting. Anyway. All right, so we're going to move on to a couple of the others. Grim Dawn, I didn't personally see any crafting. I'm going to put a little star asterisk here and say that I don't necessarily have the most experience with Grim Dawn, so there may be a better crafting system, but I personally didn't see it. And, yeah, anyway. Okay, Path of Exile. Awesome. Okay, the crafting system brings things to both sides of things, both sides of the market. You have the casual and the meta crafters, the master crafters. All of the currency in that game is based around crafting. There's no gold in the game, so it's decently balanced, although some of the imbalance comes from full-time players and things of that nature as far as currency creation and pricing and all of that. But anyway, not a huge deal there. It is kept somewhat balanced by GGG in the balance on how much that stuff drops. Anyway, the crafting system itself, very well thought out, along with the currency system. So the currency is all things that change the way your gear works, whether it be re-rolling blues or rolling new attributes on them, all being randomized and giving you that kind of necessary randomization for replayability. Which is awesome. So you don't necessarily make the best item of the day, the best item in the game 2 days after release. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, so that crafting system is really awesome. And what that does is it means that the gearing is super specialized for exactly what spec you're playing or passive, etc. And it leads to a lot of replayability, which is really the key. So replayability in ARPGs is where it's at. And a lot of that's done through customization. Anyway, moving on to Lords of Mayhem. Unfortunately, there's not a crafting system yet, so we can't judge it. What they showed in their Kickstarter is very basic, so we shall see where that comes. So we'll leave that be. But the gearing, again, very randomized, leads to a lot of replayability just because of the fact you're trying to optimize your gear. And I'm assuming that the crafting system will push in that direction, although it might shorten replayability just a little bit because you'll actually be able to craft that better gear instead of relying on it to drop. Anywho, let's move on to Last Epoch. They do have somewhat of a crafting system in here. It is, again, very basic, and it's got good points and bad points for me. In this game, you actually get these things called Shattering Stones, which are basically disenchantment stones from, or disenchantment from like World of Warcraft, etc. But instead of actually making a flat, whatever craftable item, it actually pulls or has a chance to pull the explicit stats off of the item. And the explicit stats being your prefix and suffix stuff. Now, they are also split between being a prefix and a suffix, which is terrific. You can take those items and then augment them onto other items that you get. So if something didn't have life leech on it and you wanted life leech on it, you can literally just put that stone in. It has a chance to break the item, but it's pretty minimal at the beginning. And I think the earliest I got a break was after the second one, so it's not too bad at all. What that means is you can customize gear. You don't necessarily, especially for leveling, it's terrific. You don't necessarily say you had your character revolves around leech. That's kind of one of the big ones. In order to live, you can actually just augment that onto a new weapon if it's in the damage upgrade, which is terrific because it's difficult to find upgrades on damage anyway, and then still have the necessary stats that you need. As well, on that system, included with it is the ability to take the rolls that it has. It has T1 to T5 rolls, which increase in damage or leech or etc., whatever it is, and you can actually roll that up using those same stones. Again, you have a chance to break the item, very similar to corrupting an item in Path of Exile, but you also have the chance of rolling it up to T5, which is great. T5 damage, T5 leech, etc. Now, again, with the breaking of items, you have three different kinds of fractures. You can basically break the item. The initial fracture is just a minor fracture. It literally just doesn't upgrade the item, and it makes it to where you can't touch it again. So you could use it, you just can't modify it anymore. Then you have an increased, more severe fracture, which actually re-rolls the prefix and suffix tiers. It can drop them down. It can even erase them, which is really bad. It basically trashes your item, unless you get really lucky and maybe it just downgrades one. But then also you can't upgrade it again after that. So again, it locks it. And then there's the final one, which is just it destroys the item. It keeps the white item in your bag just to make fun of you. But I haven't seen that yet, and I've done a fair amount of meta crafting. Not really. Just rolling things up to T5 and kind of moving on from there. Anywho, pretty decent system. I think it does still need some work to balance it out so you don't make the perfect items 2 or 3 days out from game release. But I think that balance comes in how often it fractures something, which is a pretty easy fix. Anywho, so pretty good, decent for replayability because you're looking, and it's terrific for looking at gear on the ground because now you're looking for those stats that you want to drop on items. So it really forces you to start looking through the gear that drops instead of just bypassing 99% of the gear that drops. So I think that's a kind of a good part of it. Actually, a really good part of it. And again, it makes you want to grind and kill a bunch of stuff, have all the drops, or have a crazy loot explosion like what's on my screen right now. The loot explosion is kind of bad because then you got to spend 10 minutes looking through all the stuff. But ordinarily, it's not bad at all. You just go, hey, oh, that one doesn't have leech, that one doesn't have damage, and then just throw it away. But awesome. Anywho, so I'm going to say at the top of this list has got to be Path of Exile. There's no way around it. The crafting system's awesome. I think the surprising one to me is going to be Last Epoch in a close number 2. And I think after balance, it could be competitive, although having all of the different currencies in Path of Exile makes it extremely difficult to pass that up because there's there's just so much there for crafting. And there's actually even vendors. I forgot about that as well. So it's a well-rounded system. Anywho, then you come in, and the other four I'm just not even going to mention because they're crafting systems right now are either non-existent or not good enough to even talk about. Awesome. Okay, now we're going to start with the late game, and this is a topic that is very divided for me. You have Diablo 2, which starts off, and it didn't have any real late game. It had Kill Bill 1.5 million times and then PvP each other, and it was just a product of the time. So I'm not going to talk bad about Diablo 2, but just there's no late game. It was just grinding bosses. Diablo 3 came in and tried to change that market with rifting, and did a pretty decent job at it, although there are problems with the system. The main one being the fact that you get these gems that you can put in gear that level up and have an attribute that does damage. The problem with that is when you start grouping together groups and solo, and then you're talking about leaderboards and the fact that XP is better in groups, which is okay because it kind of combines the community. But then when you add together the fact that you have to be a part of a group in order to get the better XP, which gives you more paragons, an unlimited amount of paragons, and then just the gem skill difference, it really promoted a problem within that grouping. Anywho, moving on from there, we have Path of Exile, which has the map system, the Atlas system, some of the late game bosses that you can only reach through the mapping system. It has its problems as well, being mainly to do with map drops and how they're related to what maps you have unlocked, and the kind of meta style of not doing certain maps so that you don't have those drop. And it really screws up when it's linked across all your characters, so you can't have a character that just does Shaper and Uber Elder and actually do a regular map farmer as well. So there are problems with the system, but there's 150 or so maps that you can choose from to go ahead and grind that late game stuff, all of varying difficulties all the way up to the difficult being T15. Most difficult being T15 is just awesome. It leads to a lot of variability in the maps. Unfortunately, like I said, some of the other systems don't necessarily help that out too much, and there are strategies, especially for the more experienced players, where you don't actually do the majority of the maps. You do about 3, which is a problem, but either way, it's a much better system that's been out there in the past. I personally have not made it to the late game in Grim Dawn, so I cannot talk about that. It obviously has some replayability because a lot of people tout about the game, but I can't get past the leveling experience personally to be able to do that, among some other issues. But anyway, Lords of Mayhem, still a new game, capped off at level 20, but they have already introduced the arena system, which is very similar to a rifting system, with wave-based gameplay, and then they have daily dungeons, which are not daily dungeons, I'm sorry, bounties, which are very similar to your rifting experience. We're not quite sure where that's going as far as bosses and etc., but they've talked about group only dungeons and things like that. Again, this is all still projected down in the future, and I hope that and given the fact the things that they've talked about that they've said, hey, we're adding that to the game, and they're actually doing, I'm excited. Aside from that, I don't have any real information, so I can't judge it. Last Epoch is in Kickstarter. I cannot talk about its late game at all, unfortunately. but I have talked to a couple of the devs, including the game director, just in chat, and was excited to see that one of the biggest problems that I had from Path of Exile was repeating of bosses in the storyline, i.e. Deidre and Shavon and Piety and a couple of others, where they do almost the exact same thing every time, even though they're minor bosses. It was obnoxious for me personally. But they said that they're not going to do something in that direction, because you're dealing with time loops. You may see a similar boss, but they should be doing different things, or you may see a different rendition of the same boss doing different things, and that was kind of a big deal for me. And again, if I've misspoken, let me know, but that was a huge foul up, I think, on Path of Exile's part, even though they did the terrific thing of not making it go through the same difficulties all the way through. Anywho, so we'll move on from here. I think Path of Exile and honestly D3 have the best late game motives and keep people playing the game. So I gotta give it personally to Path of Exile, but Diablo 3 is a very strong, very close number 2 within the genre. So anywho, that wraps up this part of the video. We're going to move on to the odds and ends section, and we're going to kind of do an overall rating of these games. Diablo 2, one of the original ARPGs. If you don't count Diablo 1, I mean, just really the following that came with Diablo 2 really locked down this genre. I can't say enough about Diablo 2, how smooth it was, how just it did exactly what you wanted it to do. It had replayability. It was fun. But unfortunately for this, by today's standards, it's dated. It really is, and that's really hard for me to say because I really enjoyed Diablo 2, and still do. I go back from time to time, and it's just fun. It's a fun game. Anywho, Diablo 3, I think, aside from some beginning foul ups with how the game went down with the auction houses and stuff, they found a workable system. And while I don't necessarily play anymore, I can understand why people do. The boss fights, for the most part, are interesting, aside from some of the greater rift bossing, which is, some of them are just impossible to kill in a good time, and others just not balanced at all, and still aren't balanced to this day. There's a lot of problems just with the fact, for me, the gearing between having all uniques and sets between some of the other games that have kind of gone away from that. It's bad for me. It's pretty, sort of, for kid type graphics. It's pretty, but it's just not. It doesn't hold my attention very long. So this is bad marks. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about Grim Dawn. Grim Dawn, I think, has too many problems for me to really enjoy, and not enough depth on the passive and active skill trees to really just keep me interested. I tried for hours and hours and hours because a lot of people have talked about it, they enjoyed it. It just never did anything for me. The bosses personally were very boring. And the bosses really where you can step out of the boundaries of what's normally in the game and really amp stuff up, and they just don't do that. Not even down to the final boss. And it really frustrated me. But yeah, it just overall felt extremely lacking. Although it was the first time I had seen the rotating of the screen, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, some later games have done better with it, and don't lag you out. Anywho, moving on to let's see, Path of Exile. Path of Exile started off really rough for me, but really that group has put together a very good game and have worked their tail off on really bringing constant updates to the game that change the way a lot of the skills feel, add in new gear, add in or balance new things. They're pretty on top of making sure that there's not a couple of builds that just absolutely dwarf everything else, but not 100%. I mean, there's a lot of factors involved, so it's a very good, clean game all the way around. And now that they've shaped up some of their like targeting issues and clunkiness, it's a good feeling game. It's got great crafting. It's got great passive system. The customization is awesome. I can't say enough about Path of Exile. Unfortunately, I think that a later game in this list actually takes over for me personally, and I can't quite put my finger on what that is, but I hope in these videos you've kind of seen what my descriptions are and why I feel that way. But I think a lot of it comes down to the customizability in combination with a good feel. And I'll say it, maybe I'm just dumb who had to dumb it down a little bit for me. Anywho, next up on the list is going to be Lords of Mayhem, or Wolcen, depending on what you guys call it. It is by far the prettiest out of all the others, which is great. I like seeing that in the genre. It's not necessarily, it's not what makes it fun. Monster killing is fun in the game. The attributes that it's gone into already are amazing. The passive skill tree, and again, before Last Epoch came out, the active skill tree was the most interesting for me, aside from maybe Path of Exile's gem system for skills. And just the fact that these developers have said they've made promises and said that they're changing stuff, and then they actually do, which is terrific to see out of a developer. I can't say that other developers have or have not done that, but the guys over at Wolcen definitely have. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. So that's awesome. And that leads to very much replayability for me, and the fact that I can kind of lean on those promises now that they've said, hey, we're gonna make this stuff happen. So that's terrific. Last up on the list for me is going to be the Last Epoch, and my main problem with the game is the fact that they say Epoch instead of Epic. Joking. Anyway, the game shows a lot of potential. I think it right now, obviously it's Kickstarter, so it's super early, can only be named as potential. Because I despite the fact that I've talked to the devs and that they are very nice individuals, I don't have any direct interaction with them as far as them talking about a subject and then making it happen in game. So like with Lords of Mayhem, where they've literally said, hey, we're going to do this stuff, and 3-6 months later it actually becomes part of the game. The game for Last Epoch just hasn't been around long enough to be able to prove that. So it's a kind of a non-point. I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially on the passive system side. But overall, and then some of the graphical side, they said they are going to be getting an upgrade on the graphics here very soon, and are moving towards that. The stuff that we're seeing here is just a demo. They made sure to be very clear on that, and it does show potential for being fun. I hope that some of this kind of points people in the right direction, and really honestly, if I have to break it down, my list of favorites, Diablo 2 still has to be at the top. I mean, it's thousands of hours of gameplay there, but with the caveat of saying that it's dated. Lords of Mayhem is actually going to squeak up and take the number 2 slot pretty handily for me, which is why I stream it as much as I do, and I show stuff here in YouTube. And it's not just because I'm trying to make a buck or anything crazy like that. I really honestly just enjoy the game. Path of Exile takes a very clear number 3 slot. And Last Epoch, well, actually, I'm sorry. Diablo 3 kind of squeaks in there. Last Epoch, I can't judge yet because it's just a demo. And again, we'll see how that pans out after their Kickstarter is done, which I'll have a link down below for if you guys would like to check them out, or at least check out the demo, make the judgment for yourself. Anywho, and then Grim Dawn, I have to put in a very clear bottom spot on this, unfortunately. Just didn't have anything for me. Didn't check any of my boxes. Anywho, we're going to move on. I don't know how, but we are. I have to throw this last little bit in. I really do. I jokingly said this to the developers of Last Epoch, but honestly, legitimately, and I say this with the most respect, I don't mean any disrespect at all, I would hope, I think the best outcome to make the best game would be a combination between the efforts of a Wolcen crew over in France, in Nice, France, and the crew of Last Epoch getting together and combining their active skill system, their passive, the passive skill tree from Lords of Mayhem, the active skill tree from the Last Epoch, some of the crafting from Last Epoch, just combining those two efforts, combining your monies, making, because that would literally that would make the best damn game in the genre, period. The combination of those groups, along with the graphics from Wolcen, etc. I know that's probably, actually, it's not going to happen. But man, it is hard for me to say that because there's such potential on both ends to have that competition between the two. But I think honestly, to be able to take down some of the Goliaths with Diablo 3 just on the graphical side, and people still playing that, the whatever Diablo or DICE, whatever Blizzard has planned as far as Diablo 4, which they've been talking about for years now, just not showing us anything, and Path of Exile, it would be not right for me not to say that those two crews together would they would make the best fucking game in the genre with that combination, hands down, hands fucking down. Anywho, all right, I'm gonna stop dragging this on. I really appreciate you guys watching this. Again, these are all just personal opinion, so feel free to chime in down below if you'd like to add anything to it, or talk about which other things I should have talked about. I can make a follow-up video if you guys like, but that's all I got for you for now. I'm Black Bart. I appreciate you guys coming out. Definitely follow me on Twitch, follow me here, and I'll bring you more crap. We'll get this done. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Bye.